Scuba Goat Under the Sea, the podcast for the inquisitive diver.
Hey there, dive buddies, and welcome to the show. My next guest has served 25 years in the Royal Air Force and fell in love with the sport of diving way back in 1999. He recognised that there was a significant similarity between life as a military man and that of a diver: teamwork. However, there was an even more significant difference between the two when compared through the holistic ethos lens. He decided to do something about this and set himself a mission to introducing human factors training into the diving profession globally. In 2019, he released a book entitled Under Pressure, which has since sold thousands of copies. Now, I have to admit that I respect and admire him for his brave contributions to the dive industry. And I say brave not because I'm admitting a man crush at all, rather that I recognise the difficulties an individual may face in attempting to create change, even when it is for the betterment of all involved. I honestly believe that what he has done so far will most definitely save lives and probably already has done so. Mr. Gareth Locke, it's an absolute pleasure to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. It's great to have an invite on here. And yeah, it has been a challenge and has required a significant amount of persistence to get this going.
Yeah, I bet. So, was it a little bit like a red rag to a bull or something? You're like a little Jack Russell just chomping at the heels?
Yeah, well, my sort of personality traits are about sort of values-based and it's like, I've got to get this done. And that actually has been a bit of a hindrance when I first started, because it was this evangelical approach of you have to change, and pissed a few people off and burnt a few bridges and took a number of years to rebuild those. And I think that's the same with anybody who's got a strong value base, who's trying to create change. It's tempering that attitude to look for the long game rather than trying to do something now. You're never going to change the direction of an iceberg, the one that's broken off the Antarctica. You're never going to change that direction really easily. It takes little nudges, and actually where I've had the biggest success is bottom up rather than top down, because there are people at the bottom who recognize actually this is really useful, knowledgeable stuff that, as you say, Will and I already know that with people who've emailed me saying, you know what, I listened to, a webinar, a podcast, or read something of yours, or I watched If Only. And that's changed my attitude as to how I've approached a dive, and I've thumbed it early, or I've not got in, or I've changed what we were going to do. And to me, that's a huge buzz, because it's like, yes, the changing one person at a time is how you can change the world.
Yeah.
It takes a long time.
Yeah. Well, you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? And then just spread the love.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, just to back it up a wee smidge, for those people that are listening that have no clue what human factors is, do you want to try and break it down into its most simplistic form, just so we've got a basis to go from? Yeah,
sure. So in its simplest term, it is how to make it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. And that means looking at individuals. It means looking at work or tasks. It means looking at equipment. It means looking at interactions and paperwork, and understand how to reduce the friction to do the right thing. So, for example, checklists are a big thing in diving at the moment. And then when you look at how they're written, they're often, sweeping generalization here, written from a point of view of liability rather than execution. So there's a huge body of evidence that says, how do you design a checklist that takes human performance variability, that could be errors, and try to design them out? And a checklist isn't just a piece of paper, or it's not just a piece of paper to make it effective. It requires a social and a cultural setup and a mental approach that says, I'm using this checklist because I'm fallible and I will make a mistake. And it's getting that message across. So there's a whole raft of issues that need to be addressed in a, as you sort of touched on earlier, holistic manner or systemic way, rather than trying to cherry pick or fix the diver, because they're the stupid ones, is actually creating an environment where it's easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing.
Yeah. And I suppose one of the major barriers that you've got there is people's personal feelings of embarrassment if they're going to thumb a dive when everyone else is more confident or more experienced or whatever, you know.
Oh, totally. The peer pressure that we're under, and ultimately we're social creatures. We like to be conformed to the social norms. And that's why, you can start to create change at a lower level with individuals and small groups, because then you can start to get a swelling. It's quite difficult to create change top down, because you still need to create that swell, that influence and social conformance that happens. But that sort of peer pressure, it might be touched on in diver training and instructor development, but I don't think it's anywhere near emphasized how much influence instructors, leaders, and peers have on others' behaviors. And you don't have to say something. Almost silence is enough to speak volumes. When somebody questions, is this a good idea? And nobody even acknowledges that I'm not sure about this. I'll be okay. And you haven't actually said anything. All you've just is agreed with them.
Yeah.
So there's a huge bit that looks at, or that should be looked at, in terms of interactions.
So the idea behind the training that you provide is to teach people not only how to recognize it in themselves, but have the confidence to be able to say so, and also recognize it in other people within the group they're diving with.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and actually the core of the training is based around the premise of creating a shared mental model, an idea of what we're going to do as a team and why we're going to do it. And that means that if there is some form of dissent, which is a good thing, or some conflict, that the peers and the leadership have created an environment where actually you don't need to have courage. There's often this bit of people, that you need to be brave to speak up. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Bravery is needed to overcome some fear. And the fear is generated by the social environment, the leaders, the instructors, the peer group that are there. And therefore, it's their responsibility to change that attitude, that environment, so that it is easy to speak up, rather than having to be brave and go, oh, I'm going to put my neck out in the line here because I'm going to say something that isn't quite right. So it's, there's a lot to do. And that is a normal human thing. Because if we go back, thousands of years to the African savannah, where you lived in a tribe in a thorn bush ring, because that was the protection from the lions. Hey, you had to be conformed to the norms of the group, because otherwise you got booted out and now outside the thorn bush and you're on your own. So
good luck.
There are very, very, exactly. There are very good reasons why we have social conformance. Whether or not they're as valid as they are now is a different thing, but it's hardwired. So the training is create that shared mental model so that people know what's happening next. And if something deviates, then they're able to sort of ask the question and say, is this right? Are we going in the right direction? Is this the right part of the wreck? Shouldn't we have turned around on the reef at this point? There are lots of things where this applies.
See, when we're talking about it straight away, I'm thinking about a blog that I wrote about 3 years ago. And in it, I was trying to describe newcomers to the diving industry, or those that want to do that open water training. And the two examples I had was the alpha male, who, Billy Big Bollocks, I can do all this and don't need to listen. And the timid lady, who would just focus and then do everything correct. And for me, the human factor error, the way I see it there, is that Mr. Billy Big Bollocks, the alpha male, was hiding his true fears and incompetencies of what was coming. And I think it does make me look towards the professional side of diving and ask the question if there's been people qualified too hastily, too quickly, and, you know, thinking of zero to hero, and then all of a sudden you're now teaching people who have no clue how to dive in a wide variety of scenarios. I suppose you bring in human factors into it kind of puts a big question mark over all of that stuff that the majority of us in the dive industry know it occurs, but don't really approach the subject.
Yeah, it is a bit of an elephant in the room. And so going to a wider sort of safety view as to why that perception exists of why the current practices are okay. A lot of safety is measured as the absence of accidents. So if we don't have any accidents and we don't have any injuries, we must be doing something right. Now, that doesn't take into account the number of people who are scared, who go off and do some training and are terrified. They've got that tick. They've moved on and gone, yeah, I went diving, but I didn't like it. And yet there shouldn't be a reason for that. Yes, there will be a small percentage who are not suited to diving, and and they aren't be in the right mental place to be underwater. So you then look at the sort of why the situation ends up as it is because you can cut away the safety margins, the experience, the time that people are supposed to do during training. And until you have lots of accidents, you must be doing something okay. And again, that's normal human behavior. We will look for short-term gains over waiting for long-term benefits. And in the case of diving and instruction and the zero to hero bit is, cool, I get to be a dive instructor and I get to make money out of my hobby. And you're right that as long as the training environment in which the students are being taught is not very risky, there's no additional dangers involved, and everything goes fine, then actually the training must have been okay. The problem is we don't know what's going to happen on the dive or with a student, and so actually you need to have almost a bigger box. You've got the sort of the core competencies or core skills that you need. And then there's the bit that says sit a bit further out than that says these are excursions that you might have. And my personal view is a lot of diver instructor training is teaching instructors how to teach a student how to pass a class, which is not the same as how to teach a diver how to dive in the real world. And if your measure is people graduating, well, without issues, you must be doing something right. But
they're not getting that inherent skill embedded into second nature. And the get out of jail card for the organizations is you are only certified to dive in conditions equal to better than you've already been certified. So that's the bit that says, well, actually you went diving in the condition that you weren't trained for, therefore it's your fault. It's like, well, hang on a minute. You've got to look at this at a system level rather than an individual level. But where does the system start and stop for you? Because I was kind of discussing this podcast before we started, a couple of days ago, actually. I've got a mate of mine coming on next week, Kai Steinbeck. Hello, Kai. He's a course director up in Cairns. And I wanted to clarify for myself, albeit I am a multi-agency instructor, I wanted to know specifically where the law starts and stops when it comes to training. And It's so ambiguous, isn't it? And his answer was literally, when people are in training, then you have to follow the letter of the law. And the letter of the law is written by whichever agency is teaching and whichever agency you're teaching under. But as soon as that person's qualified and they go off on their own, there's then no law that says a diver can't do what they want. So as soon as they're outside the boundaries of what they've been taught, then, the agencies are safe.
It's their problem.
Yeah.
Oh, totally. And, the way that risk is managed is all about risk transference. So from if I look at, so you ask the question, where's the boundary of the system? To me, the system starts at the agency's level, or actually the bodies above. So the Rebreather Training Council, the Recreational Scuba Training Council, the World Recreational Scuba Training Council. Those are the levels. That's this almost the top boundary. There might be some government regulation that sits above that, depending on the country you're in. And then it ends down at the individual diver. Now, that's the system. Whether or not people have control or influence about what happens within that system, well, that's the way that the system has been constructed. And so the way the organizations are set up is about transferring risk from them, liability, to the lowest level possible. That's what any organization would do. Yeah. So the use of liability waivers, transfers, all of those things, it's about getting the risk down to the diver and or the instructor. Your point about agency standards, I have to teach to the agency standards, because otherwise, if something goes wrong, I'm liable. Now, those agency standards may not be the best that are out there, but they are at a level which allows the agency to manage their own individual risk by passing it on. Is it achievable to do those tasks? Yes, right. It's an instructor problem if something goes wrong. If a diver goes out on a dive operation, they will nearly always sign, depending on where you are in the world, liability waiver forms. And now I am accepting responsibility for what happens on this dive. Now, interestingly, in the UK and I think Europe, they had to change the liability waiver forms, because I cannot sign away my right for your incompetence. Now, to sue based on that. I can't sue based on my incompetence, but I can sue based on your incompetence.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of international waiver forms basically say, I can't even sue you if you're incompetent. It's like, well, hang on a minute. That's your responsibility to look after me. So, where does the system end and start? It's about when those students are in their class, teaching them about the genuine risks that exist, not just about the physical risk of being underwater, but also the social risks that are there. So peer pressure, or the fact that we will drift, we will have this normalization of deviance. And Dan Orr has just published a great piece in GUE's in-depth blog today talking about normalization of deviance. And, looking at the fact that it is a normal behavior to go from, here's my rules, and I'm drifting. And I will say reduce my minimum gas I'm going to end a dive with, or exceed my depth, or the run time, or whatever it is, and everything goes okay. Or it could be having more students on a class than you're supposed to, because I generate more revenue that way. But things don't go wrong, therefore nobody knows what's happening. So explaining these normal human behaviors allows risk to be better managed after the training course or whatever it is.
Yeah. Understanding
those error-producing conditions, the stressors that lead us to erode the safety margins that are on. That is not explicitly taught in the training materials that I've had people come in my course going, I'm an instructor for this agency and so-and-so. This isn't, it might be touched on, but it is not explicitly explained. And it really should be put into the training programs that are there.
Sure. And are you trying to get them in there? You must be.
I am, and I have been for quite a while. And I understand the resistance from their part, because actually, and this is often something that's forgotten, is that the training agencies are businesses, albeit, publishing houses to develop training materials that then sell on to instructor trainers and instructors and then students. Trying to make money out of human factors based training is really difficult because it doesn't actually give you anything extra.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow you to go diving any deeper. It doesn't allow you to use any new equipment. What it does is it allows you to use your brain a bit more effectively. I think also part of the resistance is that the majority of the decision makers in the training agencies have never done any training with me. So they don't even know what the programs are about and how it could fit into their existing training materials. So there's a bit of, genuine ignorance from their part of what it looks like and how it can fit in.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is that I'm not a diving instructor, so I don't for any of those agencies. So I don't know what the materials look like, where it could slot in, where you could tell a specific story about maybe cognitive biases, why we make the decisions we do, or how to create effective communications within a team by using certain techniques that are there, or how a team evolves in the training environment and then how it evolves in the real world diving environment and the weaknesses that need to be recognized and dealt with. So it's a bit of an unknown from their side. And I get it, they're there to make money. They're not charities.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate, and it obviously does have a massive place in our industry. But does it have a place in recreational diving for your summer vacation kind of guys that dive once or twice a year that can't even remember how to put their equipment together? Are they going to be able to remember what human factors is about?
So actually, the real benefit of if human factors is taught well is it's transparent to the activities that you're doing. And I suppose to answer your question, is there something that can help? Yes. So at a recreational level is the recognition that they're fallible, that they will make mistakes. That's the first thing. And then look at what are the strategies for making sure that we reduce the likelihood. And that would be doing pre-dive check. That's a checklist. It's making sure that the instructors and the dive masters who are operating in that environment role model correct behaviors. Because those recreational divers, if they're there for a week on a holiday and they might be diving 3 or 4 times, they will look to the instructor or the dive master or the guide for what should be being done. And if the instructors and the guides, the dive masters don't do any pre-dive checks, the clients will then turn around and go, oh, cool. When you get to be really good, you don't have to do checks.
Yeah.
Whereas actually the other way around. So it's how you influence others. So it doesn't have to be pure directive and part of a lesson, but it can be influenced and role modeled by behaviors by others within the sort of system, the dive center or the liverboard or whatever.
And to be honest, I mean, you touched on one of my pet hates there is people not setting up their own equipment and not knowing how to do it properly. Now, I spent a year in Tufi in Papua New Guinea, and every diver that came to visit and dive with us had to do their own equipment setup before they got on the boat. Just the first time, and then the boys would take over and they could check as the boys go. But just for my own sanity and sanitisation, you do your own gear. And you would be amazed at how many guests would complain because they have to do their own equipment. And then the humility when they realise that they don't know how to do their own equipment because they've not done it for so long.
Yeah.
Now, surely that's an inherent problem that's going on in our industry already with us trying to be too customer carey.
Focused, yeah.
And, and again, for the guests that are assuming everything's going to be done for them. Now, that leads me on to another little point we were discussing a couple of days ago. and that's the I'm going to go on a little rant now. Assumption, and Dougal Wilson on Facebook, he asked about assumptions as well, and the assumptions from the guests there that the dive guide's going to do everything for them. It is my pet hate that people expect a dive pro to look after them on the boat, under the water. If there's any emergencies, the dive bro's going to sort it out, and then if anything goes wrong, the dive bro's at fault. And all of this stuff, and I don't want to rant too much, all of this stuff is, in my opinion, what you are trying to get clarification on for the world and get it set straight.
Yeah.
Where everyone's in their own little box, everyone works as a team, everyone knows how everything should and does happen, and then we've got clarity, hopefully.
Yeah. So, going right back to where does the system begin? If you think about where those divers have got those assumptions and those behaviors from, is when they would have been learned to dive. And as guests, they will have been given the minimum amount of instruction time to set up their gear. It would have been demoed. And then they would have been, stuff would have been done for them. Tick, you've done that skill, you've put your reg on the cylinder, you put your BC on the cylinder, right, done. You've demonstrated you can do that skill. Now we've got people who will do that for you. So all you need to do is pitch up, listen to some lectures, again, sweeping generalization, listen to some lectures, watch some videos, get on the boat, go out to the dive site, and, you get fed and watered and treated nicely. You get kitted up, people help you with what's going on. And then you jump in and somebody's going to shepherd you. And so, a lot of that initial diver training and development, you will have an instructor with you, or you'll have a guide with you, a dive master with you. And there isn't the clarity that says you are responsible for your activities. Well, hang on, I'm paying you a shed load of money to take me diving. No, I'm taking you to the dive site, and you have that. So it's looking at how does it make sense for somebody right at, I'm going to say the sharp end, that's a term from the safety world, the person who's right at the coalface, doing stuff. How does it make sense for them to do what they did? Well, if you look back at their experiential journey and how they've developed and how they've got to where they are, that's why they behave the way they do. And why...
Well, I've got to pick on you. You did say it's a sweeping statement. It is a big sweeping statement. Because there's a lot of instructors out there that are very, very good and very meticulous at what they do. But over time, you add in skill fade and the ignorance of, future guests and liverboards and more lackadaisical dive professionals, then, it will creep in. But I just wanted to make sure we don't get shot down in flames there. That not all professionals are like that,
No. and so... I totally agree. And there are lots of professionals out there. And actually, we only hear about the negative outcomes that are there. Yeah. They have a disproportional effect to our understanding. And that's a cognitive bias. We have a recall or a recency effect where if something happens and it's got significant emotional baggage associated with it, we'll be able to recall it more easily.
Yeah.
And, going back to defending the organizations, numerically, statistically, diving is pretty safe. You've probably got more chance of being killed or injured driving to the dive site than you do on the dive. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't improve what goes on in diving. But if you look at it from an organizational point of view of how much risk are we willing to tolerate, well, that's a sound number. Now, you won't get any of the organizations to tell you what that, as low as reasonably practicable number is, because that would be, commercial reputational suicide to say, yes, we're happy with a fatality rate of X in those sectors. And to be honest, it's not our problem. We've given them the standards, off they go.
Yeah.
So, we go back to risk transfer and to risk management again.
Yeah. Now, I know you've had a struggle all the way along the journey so far, bringing this into the dive industry. But I've got to ask, when you released the book, you must have seen quite a significant upturn of interest. It seemed to explode when you released that book.
Yeah, and so I'd been struggling. So I suppose the journey started in 2010-11, where I wrote a white paper looking about diving incident reporting and safety management in the UK diving industry. And it went down like a bit of a lead balloon. And shortly after that, I started a PhD, part-time self-funded PhD. And the struggle there was nobody was really interested in what I was doing. My goal was to try and produce something like something that happens in aviation, where they've got a structure which looks at organizational failures, supervisory failures, individual failures where we set ourselves up so we're tired or we're not prepared or things like that. And then there's the active failures, so we make a slip, a mistake, or a lapse, or we break a rule. So that went on for about 6 years. And in the end, I stopped doing it because I was spending money. I wasn't getting anywhere. But in January 2016, I ran the first face-to-face training program that developed as a pilot. That went well. Another one in February, another one in April. And then somebody said, well, why don't you do the pre-learning that's there and set it up as a standalone course? And I got some traction there as people doing online learning, and got some really positive feedback from people saying, look, this stuff is, should be in the training materials. And it wasn't until probably the spring of 18 where I was running a face-to-face class, and somebody had said, why don't you write a book about this? Because people will consume it as a book rather than doing online materials. So I had thought about that. So then I spent the next probably from the summer, 4 or 5 months in the summer of 18 writing it, and then the next sort of 6 months getting it edited and turned around and things like that. And I'd spent a fair amount of time through marketing training of how do I market this, because it's a really difficult topic to market, because I was trying to do it from a safety perspective, and you never market away from a threat. What you do is you market towards a benefit, because it's what people will want, not what people are trying to get away from.
Right.
So I'd spent a lot of time learning how to try and market this. So I spent the tail end of 18 marketing the book and getting the first 2 chapters out there so people could go on. So I had a pretty big list by the time the book was released in March 19. And I spent a lot of time packaging up and signing books and posting them out. And then it starts getting into the hands of, it's a terrible term, influencers. And not just in the sort of sports diving industry, but in the scientific and the military and the commercial. And actually people in traditional safety as well will pick it up and go, oh, hang on, this is really good. And then it starts spreading out. So yeah, the rise was really nice to see, because it's like, yes, there is value being created out there.
Yeah.
What I write in the books now, though, is knowledge is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. And it's attributed to Bruce Lee, but it came from a guy before that, a guy called Goethe. And it's great. I read this. Now do something with it.
Yeah.
Oh, that means I have to change. Well, I don't like change, because change requires a bit of effort and energy and things like that. But starting to get people to talk about things has been a huge benefit.
Yeah. And is it is the way forward to introduce human factors to the newer divers, the younger divers, the ones that are more accepted? They're more keen to absorb the information that's going to help them progress, rather than the ones that might be stuck in their ways and find it difficult to introduce that change.
So actually, I've now got 5 other instructors who are. So it's not just me. I've got 2 in the States, or 2 in Canada at the moment. I've got 1 in Belgium, Holland. I've got 1 in Egypt, and and one in the UAE.
Yeah.
So they do some of that sort of the sharing side, and actually they're all, with the exception of one, they're all diving instructors.
Mm-hmm.
So they give me ideas of where this could fit in. So there is a multi-pronged approach. One is to go in and try and simplify it at the probably the rescue dive master level, to try and get some interest there, to get some interest at the, I'm going to say, tech curious. Those people who are sitting there going, right, what's tech diving about? And it's like, it's all about kit and depth. And it's like, actually, a lot of it's about in your head. And how to make more effective decisions, and how to recognize that you're going to expose yourself to greater risk, and understanding and practicing the stuff that's in the book helps mitigate and control some of those. And then the other bit is going in at the sort of experienced instructors. Again, we go back to the influencer term, to get them to start even just using the language. Once we start changing words, we can change worlds. And that's not my quote, that's somebody else's. I forgot who it's from. But it is, you change the language, and people will start changing their own behaviors accordingly. And I've seen that probably over the last 2 or 3 years, and being in bigger Facebook groups where this concept of local rationality, how does it make sense for people to do what they did? And now I see other people posting those same bits, or they'll tag me in. Oh, it's great, and I'll add a little bit of extra. But the fact that people are now able to, I'm going to say, fight those battles using stuff that I've given is incredibly rewarding. And it will start cascading out. But it's a huge journey to go on. And hey, I'm up for it.
And it's not going to stop growing, is it? I mean, you've mentioned you've got 5 instructors, or Who are they? Go on.
I've got 5 instructors.
Give them a shout out.
So there's the 5 instructors I've got at the moment, and there's 4 in training. I'm waiting for them to sign off. So the 5 instructors are Guy Shockey, who's in Vancouver. There's Helen Pellerin, who's in Quebec. There's Bart Den Ouden, who's in the Netherlands. And there's Jenny Lord in Dahab. And Daryl Owen is in the UAE. And I've got 4 others and that's Meredith Tanguay, who's in Florida, Chris Tibble in the UK, Beatrice Rivara in Italy, and Mike Mason, who's up in Newcastle. So 2 weeks ago, we were supposed to be running the certifying workshops, but obviously COVID has knocked that on the head. So I'm hoping as soon as we can start traveling, I can get to certify them, and then there'll be 4 more instructors able to deliver the materials.
Okay, so we're going to have nine global instructors. That's a hefty run from, when was the book released? 2019, wasn't it? And then we've had a year of
March 19. Yeah.
We can exclude last year because we couldn't do anything.
Well, interestingly, didn't do anything face to face. But to me, COVID actually was a bit of a blessing in disguise, because people were then stuck at home going, what do I do? And I'd already started in tail end of 2019, delivering a webinar-based 10-week program. And since then, I've delivered 6 of those. So there's about 200 people have gone through some training since via the online webinar basis. And they then speak, and I'll give a shout out to Matthias, who's down in Victoria. He's changed the culture of his club, having come on a course with me last year and gone, this has blown my mind. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm going to take this stuff. And they got rid of the wooden weight belt award within their club, which was about the biggest or most embarrassing screw up somebody had done the previous year. And he said, look, this is really demeaning. This is, yes, it's funny, but nobody's really happy to receive this. So he stopped that. And I said, well, you could still turn it around. You could still issue a prize, but do it for the biggest learning experience of the year when it comes to diving. And now you've recognized the learning that's happening in the club. So really proud of Matthias for sorting that one out.
Can you say he's in Victoria, is he? Australia?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Down in Melbourne.
Hook us up. I'll come and have a dive. I've not dived Melbourne yet, and I keep itching to do it. Every time I go there, it's just not long enough to be there. But yeah, itching. Matthias, I'll come diving with you.
Yeah.
And I don't want the wooden belt.
Well, no, you could have the best learning experience. There we go.
Yeah.
It's a positive thing.
Yeah. Well, seeing as we're talking about Australia, and you're obviously in the UK, and we've mentioned Canada, America, all that kind of thing. One thing I've noticed with working and diving in various locations around the world now is that when you go to particular countries, they have a different kind of take on how you should be diving. Now, by that I mean Thailand. Some people will moan about it, say it's a bit blasé. Well, it's not. Those places that are very dense population of people going through basic training, the courses tend to be run quite tight because they've got to be up to standard with everyone else who's producing. Conversely, you come to Australia and Aussies are pretty laid back and, take everything in their stride. And I found it quite shocking to see how many people go solo diving just off the shoreline here with no redundant air supplies. And it just seems to be the norm. I find that quite frightening. But I think there's got to be a place there for, I think we mentioned it, what do you call it the other day? Culture or cultural differences?
Yeah, cultural awareness, yeah.
Have you experienced much of that so far, going through the training and the guys that you've been doing these courses with?
Not necessarily, because they're a self-selecting audience that comes on the training programs anyway. So they're the early adopters. They're the people who see the benefit of self-development. What I have seen is a little bit about. I haven't done much out I've done some training in New Zealand and Australia. I've done one session in Bali, but they were all sort of expats that were in Bali. So they weren't really indicative of the culture that's there. Yeah. In Europe, there are certainly different behaviors between sort of countries. So it's certainly an area that needs to be looked at in terms of incidents, but I haven't really encountered it myself. Now, what I did find interesting with your comment about Thailand, so here's a cognitive bias straight away, is that my perception of learning to dive out in Thailand is not great because it's about getting people through the door as quickly as possible. And the driving factor is more about money than quality because of the clientele that you're likely to be training, in that they want a bucket list ticket that says, done diving, move on. Yeah,
I'm going to the full moon party.
Yeah. And I don't know whether or not your use of the word tight meant tight as in the high quality and they were having to compete, or whether or not they were tight because they were running back-to-back courses. And so they couldn't, there's no flex for somebody who's not quite good enough to have some extra dives. Well, fine, sign off and off you go. There is a huge amount that needs to be taken into account in culture. So go back to your book, ramble, go back to your point about solo diving in Australia. Look at the system and how the local culture will change risk perceptions and what can be done to do that. So if you know that something is lacking in an output, well, you need to change what the input is. So is that the instructors, if they're not happy about people solo diving because that's the norm, well, actually there needs to be more emphasis on teamwork and shared mental models and not relying, but working together as a team during the training program. Yeah. Because if it's not emphasized then, most courses are individuals who come together as a group, learn, and they go off. They don't interact and operate together as a team. And you can do that at a recreational level. It just requires the instructor to up their game and up their knowledge and their skills to be able to teach that. So, and the fact that they don't take redundant air supplies with them, well, if that's not something that's being emphasized or taught or brought up in training, don't be surprised that people don't do it outside of the training, because, and their argument, well, they should know about these risks. They can learn from others. Well, then we get into the social conformist piece. Well, everybody else is diving without redundant air. Why do I need to? Because they're not all dropping like flies. Therefore, it must be safe. So these are all bits of the human factors jigsaw puzzle that needs to be taken into account.
It's a massive jigsaw puzzle, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. And I think this is, the human factors is general in approach and specific in application. And by that, I mean cognitive biases, social interactions, the way we make decisions, the way we make communications. There's a huge body of research that explains how this works. But how to create change at an individual level or a team level or a dive center level has to be specific. So I'm much better at answering specific problem type questions than writing something generic, because if you write something generic, people go, that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply to me. That's another bias that we have.
Yeah.
That they're different to me, so it doesn't apply to me. Yeah. Well, hang on a minute. Why is it any different? But I have got examples of being in Southeast Asia where authority or the social culture, which is normally termed as sort of authority gradient, where a junior diver or an inexperienced diver won't question a more senior person.
Yeah.
But it's not as simple as just this seniority piece. It's about respect, and we are a family that actually we wouldn't question our fathers or our uncles or the patriarch setup, because they might give me something later on. And so you get to be in situations, and I know instructors who operate out there, where they will fail something on the leader, the team leader, the dive that's going on, and the rest of the team, or they'll get the leader to make a mistake, and the rest of the team will just sit there and not question or challenge what's going on. And so there's a huge learning that's needed for the instructors to understand these behaviors and come up with strategies to inform their students that says, look, once you're out of the cover and the protection of an instructional setting, you're out on your own. And that means that you have to be aware of these. And if things do go wrong, you have to say something before it becomes catastrophic.
Yeah.
So it's a huge jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. I must admit, I'm sitting here listening to you and just thinking back over what we've discussed over the last however long. And it's an awkward topic. I mean, we've got to say it is an awkward topic to talk about. And especially, I mean, I'm not forwarding, I'm not, shy in coming forward and speaking what I want to speak. But I found myself thinking twice, thinking before I speak, which is not usually me. So I think I can now understand a little bit more why it takes 10 weeks of webinars to get this training across, because you've got some massive voids to cross and a lot of barriers to break down for this to be a success.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And, I look at where aviation, started in the 80s, because they were blaming pilots for pilot error, sticking the aircraft in the ground because they were not paying attention or miscommunicating and wrong selections, but ultimately boiled down to pilot error. And it wasn't until they started looking at the cockpit voice recorders and the flight data recorders, and they said, oh, hang on a minute. There was an awareness of what was going on, but they were unable to share that picture amongst the rest of the crew. And when they did, it was potentially too late. And then they start looking at, well, hang on a minute. The errors didn't just happen in the cockpit. They would have been developed from the aircraft design or air traffic controls design or airport design, and start looking further back up. So you start taking a systems view about what's going on. So even though aviation has been doing this for 40 plus years, 50 years or so, they still have issues, and they still have, aircraft crashes. They still have miscommunication issues, all of those things. And that's an incredibly regulated industry. Healthcare has been doing it for probably about 15 years, and they really struggle because of the dynamic environment, the pressures and the social, cultural issues that exist in a healthcare environment. And in the UK, they're starting to bring some formal structure to human factors into the clinical environment based on work by a guy called Martin Bromley, who's formed the Clinical Human Factors Group as a way of trying to get that. And there's now governmental support to what they're doing. And the colleges, the surgeons, anaesthetists, dentists, whatever, are now starting to put stuff together. In the diving industry, it's me and a band of followers who are going, this is a good idea. We need to do it. And I get the resistance. There aren't dead bodies lying up. Therefore, it must be okay.
Yeah. Well, I didn't say right. I should have said it right at the start of this bloody episode, to be honest. You're 25 years in the Air Force. You're actually a navigator, weren't you?
Yeah. Hercules navigator in a multi-crew environment. And then went on and did a master's in aerospace systems, which is where my knowledge of human factors and sort of the deeper knowledge. And that's when I sort of started digging deeper. And then went into flight trials with Airbus. So picked up some human factor stuff there, then worked in research and development, and then worked in procurement and systems engineering. So a very broad view of the world. And it was during the latter sort of 5 years of my time in the Air Force that I'd started the PhD. A huge breadth.
I was just going to say, 'cause any of the divers that are out there thinking, I'm not going to listen to this fellow. He's not even a professional. He's not even an instructor. Well, I think you kind of top it for, having experience in a structured work environment and how teamwork comes together. Just a little bit.
And so, and from the diving side of the majority of my training has gone through GUE. So I did fundamentals in 2006, where I only had about 40 dives to my name. So I was really lucky that I didn't have to unlearn a bunch of stuff. And then since then, I've probably got about 800 dives, certified at the highest levels to, my highest levels of GUE Tech 2, which is an advanced trimix course, and JJ Rebreather, which I'm going to get recertified on at the end of May, to get back up to speed on that. So, but I know there was a question about rebreathers.
That was, what was it? Lisa Marie. Yeah. What's your thoughts on rebreathers then? That was a whole
What's
new
my view
topic.
on rebreathers? So my view on rebreathers, are they safe? Are they unsafe? A piece of equipment is not unsafe in of itself. And as a simple example, as a hairdryer could be safe. It's not particularly safe if you sit in a bath and put the hairdryer in the water with you. And so it's this need to look at a system again. So rebreathers have been designed to the level that the market will support. And by that I mean is it costs manufacturers money to design, build, certify, and they've got to recoup that money, and then they've got to make a profit. Otherwise, they're not a valid, sustainable business. So the diving community won't pay much more than they pay already for what's there. So in terms of maturity and equipment set, it's probably, there are little nuances, but it's probably about as mature as it's going to get. Then we look at the other pieces of the system, and that's the training agencies, the instructors, and the divers themselves. And how they all come together is how to create a safe diving, inverted commas, safe diving operation on a rebreather, and recognize that it's working together that creates safety, not a rebreather is unsafe. The difficulty is that there is no formal training that goes into agency training materials that talk about human fallibility and cognitive biases and why checklists are designed the way they are. They could probably be improved to make them, to have less friction, to be in a situation that you operate as a team. And if one of the team isn't using a checklist, that you've created the environment that actually, if I'm not using a checklist, I expect you to call me out.
Yeah.
And if you're not using one, I'm going to call you out. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not easy because those soft bits are not easy to measure. It's much easier to measure simple compliance when delivering a course, but that doesn't necessarily help you develop competencies and attitudes. And the final piece then is the expectation that if you haven't reached a standard, then you don't get a certification. Now, I know some agencies put that in the hands of the instructor that says, have they got the right attitude to dive this equipment? If not, then you can refuse certification. Yeah. That has to be explained really clearly before the course starts, because otherwise you're going to end up with a whole world of hurt that says, hang on a minute, I matched all the skills and it's just your opinion that I'm not safe. And so, you end up with conflict there. Yeah. So to answer the question, Lisa, my view is they are a valid tool and they're potentially safer than open circuit at certain depths. However, you also need to train in shallower depths to be able to go to the deeper depths to be competent when things go wrong. Yeah. And you also need to have the attitude that says, this thing can fail. I need to know what it's doing all the time, and I can resolve those failures. And that means I need to go and practice them. And there's nothing wrong with doing drills in a quarry in the shallows to make sure that you're competent to deal with almost no notice failures. Because those failures, if we knew they were going to come, we'd do something about them.
For sure. I mean, it's got to be second nature, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is through training, plain and simple.
Yeah. And with effective feedback, yeah.
Yeah. Happy days. We've been going on for quite some time now.
So we have.
It must be time for your breakfast and time for me to have a beer. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. How can people just get in touch with you and where can they find you online? We'll put them in the show notes as well, but give them a call out.
Yeah, so the easiest way is thehumandiver.com. And that there's the contact page there that sends a form through to me. So that's the easiest bit. There's a Facebook page as well, or Facebook group rather. We've got about 6,500 people in, which if you just search in Facebook for Human Factors in Diving, then you'll find that. And I'd really recommend anybody who wants to learn more about human factors in a 30-minute documentary is to go onto the Human Diver website, go to the top and look at If Only, click the link there and watch a documentary, which will bring a tear to some people's eyes because it deals with a fatality and it deals with raw emotion of a dive team that lost a member. And the story is told through a lens of human factors and a just culture, which is about understanding how it made sense for somebody to do what they did. There are also some additional notes. So if you're inclined to take this further, there is a guide that explains the event in more details and also teaches you how to run a workshop on how to learn more about or learn from the documentary, If Only. And you can get the book from the website as well or from Amazon.
Happy days. Well, we'll put it all in the show notes. If you want to put a link to this on your website, feel free, and people can listen to it who haven't already. And I'll put a few links in for that If Only doco. Yeah, I'll put that into the show notes as well, so they've got a direct link to you there.
That's awesome.
Gareth, it's been awesome.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Let's do it again at some point, especially with all these new instructors that are coming through. We can put something together. And
that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Happy days.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Matt. And have fun to everybody. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, mate. And goodbye, everybody.
This is Scuba Goat Under the Sea, the podcast for the inquisitive diver.